Every country has a case that refuses to go away, a case that survives news cycles, a case that remains alive in conversations years later.
And tonight, detectives from DCI have told Citizen TV that an upcoming interior designer, JEFF MWATHI, did not take his own life, but was murdered.
In Kenya, one of those cases is the death of a 23-year-old interior designer, JEFF MWATHI. Even today, mention the name JEFF MWATHI and some questions quickly emerge. What really happened that morning? Why did the case spark national outrage? Why was an inquest ordered? And perhaps most importantly, what happened during Jeff's final 45 minutes? This is a reconstruction of the known events, the witness testimonies, the CCTV timeline, the forensic evidence, and the questions that remain unanswered. Because on the morning of February 22nd, 2023, a young man walked into an apartment building. Just 2 hours later, he was dead. And Kenya has been trying to understand what happened ever since. Before he became subject to headlines, investigations, and court proceedings, JEFF MWATHI was a simple young Kenyan trying to build a future. Friends and family describe him as ambitious, a young interior designer with plans, ideas, and dreams. According to testimony later given in court, Jeff was excited about opportunities that lay ahead. He had work he wanted to do, projects he hoped to complete, and a future he was actively building. Nothing about his life suggested that within hours he would become the center of one of Kenya's most debated death investigations. Like many young people in Nairobi, Jeff was chasing an opportunity. And in February of 2023, an opportunity appeared to be presenting itself. That opportunity involved a popular Mogidhi musician known to millions of Kenyans, DJ Fatso. According to accounts that later emerged, Jeff and Fatso were not complete strangers.
JEFF MWATHI because he was my good friend, and
Fatso would later state publicly that they had known each other before the incident. They had had interactions, conversations, and discussions involving interior design work. It was the kind of connection that many young professionals hope for. A chance to network, a chance to build relationships, a chance to secure future work. And on February 21st, 2023, that opportunity appeared to move forward. What nobody knew at the time was that this ordinary meeting would later become the beginning of a mystery that remains unsolved years later. February 21st began just like any other day, but by evening, Jeff was spending time with DJ Fatso and several other individuals. As the night progressed, the group moved through Nairobi. According to witness accounts and later investigations, they visited entertainment venues and socialized together. At this point, nothing appeared unusual. No emergency, no reported conflict, no indication of the tragedy that was about to unfold. As the hours passed and the city slowed down towards dawn, the group eventually made their way to Redwood Apartments, a residential complex located along Thika Road in the Roysambu area. This location would soon become famous for the national investigation, and thanks to the CCTV cameras, investigators would later be able to construct parts of what happened next. According to testimony presented during the inquest, CCTV footage captured JEFF MWATHI, DJ Fatso, and several others entering the apartment at approximately 3:33 a.m. in the morning. At this point, Jeff and DJ Fatso were in the company of 3 other ladies, as seen in the CCTV footage. This timestamp would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case, because it established the beginning of the final chapter of Jeff's life. At 3:33 a.m., Jeff is alive. He enters the apartment. They are later joined by 2 other gentlemen who are described to be DJ Fatso's cousin and his driver. For the next hour and 15 minutes, life appears to continue normally, but investigators will later discover that the events that followed would become increasingly difficult to explain. At this stage, nobody knew that they were watching evidence that would later eventually be analyzed in court. Nobody knew investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct these movements. Nobody knew that one simple timestamp would be the beginning of a national mystery. At 3:33 a.m., the story is still ordinary. An hour 15 minutes after arriving at Redwood Apartments, the CCTV timeline records another important moment. At approximately 4:48 a.m., DJ Fatso and 3 women leave the apartment. According to the investigating officer's testimony, they were seen exiting the building before eventually leaving the compound. Minutes later, approximately 5:02 a.m., Fatso's vehicle exits the premises. This detail would later become crucial because as public pressure mounted and investigations intensified, one question remained. Was DJ Fatso present when Jeff MWATHI fell? According to the CCTV evidence reviewed during the inquest, the answer to that question appears to be no. The footage presented in court indicated that Fatso had already left the compound before the fall occurred. For investigators, this answered one question, but immediately created another one, a much bigger one. If Fatso had already left, what happened next? For years, attention focused on who left, but investigators soon became interested on who remained behind. Because according to testimony presented in court, after Fatso and the 3 women departed, 2 men remained in the apartment in the company of Jeff MWATHI. And somehow within the next 45 minutes, everything changed. Every mystery has a moment where the trail disappears. In the case of Jeff MWATHI, that moment begins at 5:02 a.m. The vehicle leaves the compound, Jeff is still alive, the apartment remains occupied, and for the next 45 minutes, there is no public footage showing what happened inside. No camera inside the living room, no camera inside the bedroom, no camera recording conversations. Only questions. Investigators would later focus heavily on this period. Because at the beginning of those 45 minutes, Jeff was alive. At the end of them, he was dead. Years later, the court proceedings would still be trying to establish what unfolded during this period. And it is here that the timeline becomes difficult to reconstruct, not because there is no evidence, but because the available evidence only tells a part of the story. Some believe that the answers lie inside those minutes that were missing. Others believe that the available evidence tells enough story. But everyone agrees on one thing. Those 45 minutes changed everything. At approximately 5:47 a.m., the timeline resumes. The following CCTV footage shows Jeff MWATHI's fatal fall. Viewers' discretion is advised. According to CCTV evidence reviewed in court, a person believed to be Jeff MWATHI is captured falling from the building. This footage lasts only moments, but its consequences would echo around Kenya for years. A young man who had entered the apartment alive just 2 hours earlier was now gone. And below, at ground level, someone else was about to become part of the story: the security night guard. The security night guard testified that between 5 and 6 a.m. in the morning, he heard a loud sound, a heavy impact. He left his position to investigate. What he found would stay with him forever. A young man lying on the ground, severely injured, motionless. According to his testimony, Jeff's head had suffered catastrophic injuries. His trousers were also pulled down to the knees. Despite this, the guard is seen in the CCTV footage sectioning out the area with cardboards to preserve the crime scene. Realizing the seriousness of this situation, he immediately raised alarm. The caretaker was informed, and the building management was contacted. The police were notified. At that moment, nobody knew that the scene before them would soon become the focus of a national conversation. As daylight approached, confusion began turning into concern. Caretakers and building staff reportedly moved through the apartment complex attempting to identify the victim that had fallen. Door after door was checked, residents were questioned, and people tried to piece together what happened. But instead of answers, more questions began to emerge. According to the testimony later presented during the inquest, the occupants connected to the apartment where Jeff had spent the night did not immediately respond when inquiries were first made. That detail would later become the subject of public debate, not because it proved wrongdoing, but because people were trying to understand the timeline. Trying to understand reactions, trying to understand behavior. As investigators arrived and evidence began to be collected, a larger question started taking shape. Was this a case of self-unaliving, or an accident, or something else entirely? At this stage, nobody knew, and the uncertainty would only grow bigger. For Jeff's family, this was the beginning of a nightmare. For investigators, this was the beginning of a complex case. And for the country, it was the beginning of a story that would soon dominate conversations across social media, television, and courtrooms. Because the death of Jeff MWATHI was no longer just a tragedy, it had become a mystery. In the hours and days that followed Jeff MWATHI's death, investigators began trying to answer a question that seemed simple. How did a healthy 23-year-old man end up dead outside the 10th floor apartment? As evidence was collected, statements recorded, an earlier explanation began to take form: self-unaliving. But almost immediately, that explanation met resistance. Not from strangers on the internet, but from people who knew Jeff, his family.
When Fatso left, he left a cousin and a driver and the late Jeff.
Yes, ma'am.
If this person fell from the window, will you not want to know were these people in the room? Because they told you this is where we told you to.
His friends, those closest to him, to them, something did not feel right. They pointed to his future plans, his ambition, his work, the opportunities that he had been discussing only hours before his death.
Made a lot of noise, you being one of them. Another one is called Karen Young, and other prominent artists.
They struggled to reconcile those things with a conclusion that was beginning to take shape. And as the questions grew, the public interest exploded. Soon, the story no longer was confided in police files. It became national news. As details from the case began spreading online, a movement emerged. Justice for Jeff. The hashtag quickly gained momentum. Thousands of Kenyans began discussing the case, analyzing interviews, examining timelines, looking for answers. Some believed the investigation was moving too quickly. Others believed crucial questions were not being answered. The case struck a nerve. Because many people saw Jeff in themselves, a young man trying to make something out of his life, a young man chasing opportunities, and now a young man whose final moments remained unclear. As the public pressure intensified, the case refused to fade away, and eventually authorities were forced to take another look. As public scrutiny increased, DJ Fatso began speaking publicly. Appearing on interviews, he gave his version of events. He maintained that he had known Jeff before the incident. He stated that they spent time together that day. He explained that he had left the apartment before Jeff's death, and he repeatedly denied involvement in any wrongdoing. Some of his statements appeared consistent with the CCTV timelines reviewed by the investigations. Others sparked debates. One interview in particular attracted attention.
Mwili ilikuwa mahali hapa hivi, unaona mahali kama pale, na mimi nimepaka hapa, so nashuka ndo niende gate iko pale, so kuna pillar, there are pillars za buildings zenye watu hupaka. So unaona tu kichwa somewhere hapa hivi, pata huku kando kuna nyama zimetapaka. Unanipata? So I can assure you the pillar imenizuia kuona hata the body itself. Naona tu nywele kidogo hapa tu yenye kichwa imetokea somewhere hapo. So mimi natembea naona nyama zimetapaka. I can assure you hata sikuweza kuangalia hiyo mwili, sikuiangalia hivi. And even the CCTV footages can show. I held my head like this. Hadi naangalia, unaona ile unachungulia, hutaki kuona.
In this interview with Radio Jambo, Fatso stated that after returning and learning a body had been found, he avoided looking at it, stating that he even held his head because he feared death and did not want to see an unalived body. Immediately, some viewers later pointed to the CCTV footage that showed him moving casually through the scene after his return. This raised serious questions. For viewers, it was simply a difference between a brief glance and a deliberate examination of the body. Years later, opinion remains divided. What is clear is that every interview generated more discussion, more theories, more scrutiny, and more pressure to investigators to establish what exactly happened. The deeper the public looked into the case, the more complicated it became. As concerns continued to grow, Jeff's family pushed for further investigation. The case attracted the attention of homicide detectives. The body was exhumed for a second autopsy. A second autopsy was conducted, and investigators began re-examining the evidence. This would later become one of the most important turning points of the entire case, because now the focus was no longer on assumptions. It was on evidence, forensic evidence, CCTV evidence, witness testimony, and official findings. The chief government pathologist, Dr. Johansen Odor, later testified that Jeff died from severe injuries occurring on the head, neck, and limbs. The injuries were consistent with a fall from a height. At the same time, one of the most widely circulated theories was challenged. Forensic examination found no evidence of SA, but the public was not satisfied, stating that too much time had passed for this conclusion to be made. Even with this, they did not answer the central question: how did Jeff end up falling? And what happened between the missing 45 minutes? In a decision that reflected the complexity of the case, prosecutors did not proceed with murder charges. Instead, an inquest was ordered. The purpose of the inquest was not to assign blame, but to establish facts, to hear testimony, and examine evidence. And most importantly, to reconstruct the events of that morning. Over time, witnesses took stands, investigators, family members, pathologists, security personnel, each adding another piece to the puzzle. The CCTV timeline was reviewed. The moments of individuals entering and leaving the building was examined. Questions were asked, answers were challenged, and the search for the truth continued. Years after Jeff's death, the case remains active. Every testimony brought new details. Every hearing brought renewed interest. And still, the same question remained: what happened inside Redwood Apartments during Jeff Mwathi's final 45 minutes? Perhaps the most remarkable thing about this case is not the controversy, it's the persistence. The persistence of a mother seeking answers. The persistence of family members refusing to give up. The persistence of investigators, lawyers, journalists, and ordinary Kenyans who still continue to follow the case. Because at the center of every court hearing, each interview, every headline, and every social media debate is a human being. Jeff Mwathi, a son, a friend, a young man with plans for the future. As this documentary comes to an end, we are left with facts. We know Jeff entered the apartment. We know he fell from the building. We know the fall caused injuries that ended his life. We know investigations, forensic examinations, and court proceedings followed. But there are still questions that only the justice system can answer. Or as others say, only Jeff Mwathi can answer these questions. To Jeff's family and friends, we acknowledge the pain of reliving these events and offer our deepest condolences. To the investigators, lawyers, witnesses, and everyone pursuing the truth, we recognize the long road that has brought this case this far. To everyone that is watching, let this be a reminder that behind every case file is a real person whose life mattered. The search for the truth can be slow. Justice can take time. But the hope remains the same, that one day the full story of what happened that fateful February morning will be known. And whatever the truth leads, it will finally bring peace to those who have spent years searching for answers.